So, what else did we talk about last week? We talked about sites, or the week before, whenever it was. Everybody forgot, right? Everybody went. Anybody go to Virginia for the holidays? That's where I went. There was a foot of snow. It was highly inconvenient for driving.
What you doing ever then?
They're not supposed to have a foot of snow in Tidewater, you know. That's supposed to be relatively warm. Oh, let's talk about the KCC. That's a good thing. What's the KCC? What does it do? Oh, come on, you can't just tell me the name and not know what it does.
Okay, looks at the DC and creates a replication topology to replicate in an efficient manner.
Creates a replication topology.
Okay.
Exactly. All that efficient manner, that's correct too. So you have these DCs that you've created, and we know that they're multi-master. That's like M&Ms, those little round chocolate things. We know that they're multi-master. They all have to replicate, and you don't necessarily want to have to create, particularly if you have hundreds of them, you don't have to create this topology, who's going to talk to who. The KCC creates a replication topology, and it decides that this one will talk to this one, and this one will talk to this one, and this one may talk to this one. It creates some kind of topology for them to replicate with each other, because you don't want everybody talking to everybody. And it's smart enough, it runs all the time, and if this guy goes down, it's smart enough to rewrite the topology to make an adjustment for that. So it does exactly what you said. It creates a replication topology and it ensures it's efficient. However,
Is that simple? It makes sure it does it in 4 steps?
4 steps?
For a hop?
Yeah, I believe it's 4. Could be. If that's what you remember, I'll take your word for it. I don't remember that, but that might be right. You knew you knew the 500, so I'm thinking you know numbers. So, within the site, DC 16 is going to be the bridgehead, and DC 16 will be the guy that talks to Greensboro because he's the point of contact. He's the bridgehead instead of having all 20 DCs trying to shitter shatter. Does that make sense? Everybody knows about bridgeheads, right? We mentioned that. Nobody forgot that already, right? Let me see. Did I miss anything about sites? Oh, I put this in bold on my notes and I didn't mention it, so I should mention this. Hey,
All right.
wonderful. So, what does, we know that sites are defined by subnets. What do sites allow us to do? It allows the administrator to manage replication. It allows the administrator to manage replication. You'll see it again on the midterm. And the way it allows them to manage replication is because the KCC generates the replication topology. But it does its own thing with no respect to location because it doesn't care about location. That's not its job. It just establishes a topology. Sites allow the administrator create these sites, and he or she can control replication. And we can change it so that these sites, maybe we don't want Charlotte talking to Tokyo all the time. We might only want that to happen overnight or something. Of course, overnight's here, it's daytime there, right? It was last time I was in Japan. Right? So, what have I missed here? SMTP, Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. Anybody remember that? And what's the other one? So, Simple Mail Transfer Protocol and Remote Procedure Call. This is how we replicate between sites. What's the normal default preferred way? RPC, Remote Procedure Call. That's how we want to do it. That's fast, relatively speaking. It's secure, it's encrypted. And you'll see, if you look on any system and do a network trace, you'll see that Windows does RPC all the time. There's all kinds of RPC traffic that goes on. But this RPC is how we want to replicate between well-connected sites, which means a good network connection. However, if we've got a crappy connection, RPC doesn't respond well to crappy connections. SMTP, Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, that's what we use for a bad, an unstable, an unreliable, a slow connection. RPC is the default protocol, is what you want to use for well-connected sites. SMTP, which is Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, it's what's used to send email on old systems. You got POP and SMTP, anybody know about that? POP is Post Office Protocol, it's for receiving email, and SMTP is Simple Mail Transfer Protocol for sending it. We're using an established protocol, nothing new. Just took that protocol to use over a crappy line because it works well. It doesn't offer all the same features as RPC. Good connection, RPC. Bad connection, SMTP. RPC is the preferred. I'm sure that's on the test too. If I wrote it down, it's on the test. And RPC runs, yes sir?
I was gonna say, it's a good thing you don't talk fast.
Well, I'll try to slow down.
No, we got you, we got you.
Someone was recording it. I don't know if he's got enough gigs or whatever back there.
I'll speak for myself.
And you're unanimous in that, right? That's what Mrs. Slocum used to say. Who knows who Mrs. Slocum is? Oh man, nobody has ever watched British TV before?
Yeah, wasn't she the one at the mall?
Yeah, she has kind of the orange hair.
Yeah.
And she'd say, speaking for myself, that I'm unanimous in this.
Looks kind of
RPC, replicate between sites, well connected. SMTP, replicate between sites, bad connected. Don't want to use SMTP unless we absolutely have to. Like a dial-up connection or something really awful like that. Anybody remember dial-up, AOL? Okie dokie, let's see here. So, the RPC, by the way, is RPC over IP, which means we're running it over Internet Protocol. Everybody knows TCP/IP, right? Transmission Control Protocol, Internet Protocol. Everybody's taking network class, right?
Yes.
So I can have everybody sub that. Okie dokie. Let's see. Done. We create a domain, and let's say we have two DCs. I would draw them inside this box, but you wouldn't be able to see them. So we have two DCs. When the first DC is created, I'll come back to that. These DCs, when you have two DCs, they have a relationship, right? And if you create another domain, a child domain, which you did, right? We created child domains, right?
Yeah.
Right? We get an automatic what? Between
Trust.
all right,
Relationship.
trust. And because it got created, P is the parent, P-A-R-E-N-T. We get an automatic trust between these two, which is a security relationship, which allows these two to work with each other from a security standpoint. And because it was automatically created, you didn't have to create it when you made the child, it automatically got created. It's a transitive trust. How do you spell transitive? T-R-A-N-S-I-T-I-V-E. Anybody know how to spell?
I'm pretty
Somebody
good.
needs some spelling help. A transitive trust gets created automatically.
Automatic.
All right? Transitive trust. Now you can create another kind of trust. Let's say, you should remember this, we have all these domains, and we have another domain, another domain, another domain, another domain. Now, that's a triangle representing a domain. All these are domains. So this is whatever, lax.com, and this is child1.lax, child2, whatever. They can be called anything. The normal way the trust relationship works is if this domain needs to do something that involves this domain, it has to walk the tree and come back down. That's the default way it works. Same with this one. If this guy needs to do something with this guy, he's got to go. But that's inefficient. So we may know that this domain and this domain need to talk all the time. There's some application or there's something between them that they need constant chitter chatter. So we can create a trust specifically between these two, a manual trust that we create, and it is called a shortcut trust. How do you spell trust? T-R-U-S-T. T-R-U-S-T. A shortcut trust. And it allows us to avoid this problem of it having to walk the tree. It's not something that's recommended that you create hundreds of them, but if you have a situation like this, it's worthwhile if you know that these two domains have to interact on a regular basis. It saves this trip. And this trip could be around the world. Okay. Isn't that cool? So, user principal names. Did we talk about user principal names? I think that was on one of the multiple choice, wasn't it? Anybody remember user principal names? Nobody remembers user principal names? I think I talked about it somewhere else. Did I ever mention 23,500 miles?
No.
I can't believe I didn't mention that. That's one of my favorite things to talk about. And it has nothing to do specifically with Active Directory, but it does have to do with data associations. You don't have to write this down. Although I may ask it again. 23,500 miles. Now this is a rough number. If you look this up somewhere on the web, you'll find different numbers. This is kind of a round number that's commonly used. has nothing to do with Active Directory except it's related to data communications. I never mentioned this before.
No.
This is one of my favorite things in the world to talk about.
Really? You gotta find it.
I'm fixing to put the booyah in the doodad because if I don't, I'll get penalized. All this administrative minutia is not my thing. So, you don't have to write this down for the test. This isn't going to be no test, unless I had a question. How do you draw a satellite dish?
Close enough.
That's pretty good, huh?
Close enough.
Anybody remember Carl Sagan, Cosmos?
Yep.
See? That's cool, right? 1990 that came out? Like 13 of them? Anybody? Somebody said people know what I'm talking about, right? And most of the stuff, if you cross-check it today, his stuff is still correct. Very little of what he said was wrong.
Wow.
So you got this Cosmos? Remember that?
I'll say.
Carl Sagan? He was an astronomer, right? Astronomer? He wasn't an astrologist, because that's like the people that read your palm, right? Bob is the name I can spell. Anybody remember Microsoft Bob? Microsoft Bob? You remember Microsoft Bob? The logo for it was like a smiley face.
Bob the Builder, maybe.
Microsoft Bob was a product that sat on top of Windows 3.1 to make Windows 3.1 easier to use. I think it was 3.1, 3.11.
Yeah,
To make it easier to use.
Oh, yeah.
And it didn't sell very much. Very little. It was one of those that ended up in the bargain bin at Micro, whatever it used to be, Micro Center. They used to be around, right? Micro Center? Anybody remember them?
Yeah.
They went the way of CompUSA and a lot of the other.
Yeah, I remember them.
But Microsoft Bob did not succeed, did not sell. But the project manager for Microsoft Bob was named Melinda. Anybody know who Melinda is? Melinda now is Melinda Gates, so she did okay.
Wow.
Microsoft Bob didn't work out too well, but Melinda did well. So, you take Microsoft Bob,
Melinda's Bob was better.
if somebody's on the, what do they call that thing, the internet?
Yeah.
Google? Everybody's using Bing, right?
No.
If you search Google for Microsoft Bob, you'll find that I didn't make it up. Don't call Bob at ITT Techical.edu. So, if I log in to a domain, and I use whatever my username is at my domain name. So in the case of here, the domain name we log into really is an ITTTech.edu, but nevertheless, this is a good example. I'm appending my domain name to my username, and it looks much like an email address. And it could be an email address, but doesn't necessarily have to be. This is a user principal name. So if I have, like in your case, you've got a parent domain and a child domain. If I'm sitting in the child domain and I'm getting ready to log into a workstation, but my user account lives in the parent domain, I could put my username bob@parentdomain.com, and that is my user principal name. The alternative, if you look at these, you've got a drop-down box, and you can select from the domains on the drop-down box. Everybody knows what I'm talking about when you log in? This is a user principal name. It looks like an email address, and it's possible, depending on how your email is configured, it's possible that it might also be your email address, but doesn't have to be. For purposes of the test, when you're asked about user principal names, if you know that a user principal name looks like an email address, you'll be able to pick out the correct information. It may or may not be your real email address. It's your username at your domain name, just like an email address. Did we cover that before? I think we did. T-A-L-O-G. Global catalog. We're going to talk about that in depth when I get to the slides. There's a bunch of stuff on the slides that I'm not going to say right now. I'm just going to say some key information now. So, the global catalog is a critical AD component that contains a list of the objects in Active Directory. Either a full list or a partial list. Now, the difference is, if I'm a domain controller, and I'm also a global catalog server, within my own domain, I have a full list. If we have a child domain over here, I have a partial list of the child domain's information. So within my own domain, I'm a global catalog server. Within my own domain, I have a full list of all the stuff in Active Directory, like an index. Other domains that are associated, child domains or whatever, any domains that we have relationships with, I have a partial list.
Would that list be what that DC can access?
Well,
Like that's the only list that would get?
Well, I'll tell you, it's a partial attribute set, that's what it's called. The global catalog, I have information on a domain that I'm not a member of. So if you have domain A and domain B. So this is a DC in domain A. For domain A, I have a complete list. For domain B, I have a partial list, partial attribute set. And what the global catalog does for us, it helps processing login, and we'll talk about universal groups here in a little bit. But it also helps us find stuff. And the partial attribute set is not picked at random. It's things that are commonly looked for in other domains, like usernames and stuff like that, things that are commonly looked up. So a catalog, just like a regular catalog, helps you find stuff. Global catalog, and the way we find it is we query DNS, right? We talk to DNS, and we get a service record. Remember service records? And the service record is underscore GC is what we query for. And what that does is, the underscore GC record, and when you get in the lab, you can look at yours and you'll see, that will have a list of the machines in the domain that are global catalog servers. That's a function that they have. So, assuming that they're properly registered, when we query for this record in DNS, which is a service record, we'll get a list of the global catalog servers. There may be one, there may be more. And we do that, port 3268, GC. Global catalog, port 3268, underscore GC is the DNS, the way we query DNS for it, for the global catalog. 3268. Who's got the syllabus?
I got it.
I got it, not in front of
Now,
me.
you don't get extra credit for having the syllabus. The objects.
Right.
This is a reference list of all objects, and if you look down on question 3, on that same page,
To which port does the underscore GC serve?
3268.
TC,
This information could be very helpful.
TCP 3268.
That's on page 8, though.
So, and because these questions will come up when you do the multiple choice, plus some of them will show up in the exam. So, the other thing we're going to talk in depth about global catalog. We're not done with that. So the other thing we're talking about tonight, as I mentioned earlier, is FSMO, flexible single master operations. You know, originally it was going to be, when Microsoft first designed this, it was going to be floating, because it was going to move around as needed. So it would be on a domain controller, and it may automatically move to somewhere else, but that doesn't happen now.
That's magic.
Before it even got released, they changed floating to flexible. They had the F in there, and they needed to find another word. So what happens is, when you create the first domain controller, it gets all 5 FSMO roles. There's 5 of them. 5. Yeah, 5. Now, 2 of them, this is 2 of 5. 2 of them are forest specific. So what does that mean? That means if I have a forest, a big forest, say I'm Bank of America. Anybody work at Bank of America? Wachovia / Wells Fargo, or was it Wells Fargo / Wachovia? Very cool. Would you sign a sheet, please? Because I get confused if you don't. Matter of fact, tell me your name so I can mark you present. Aaron, very cool. Let's see here. The first DC in the environment gets all 5. 2 of them are forest specific. What that means is, if we're at Wells Fargo / Wachovia, we got a bunch of domains. No matter how many domains we have, as long as they're in the same forest, these 2 FSMO roles that we're going to talk about are all there are. So I can have 1,000 domains, but these particular 2 FSMO roles within the same forest will be the only 2 that hold those roles. There will be no others, no matter how many domains I add. And those 2 are the schema master. That's one of them. And what's the other one? Domain naming master. So, I've got a forest that has 50 domains in it. I still have one schema master, and one domain naming master. I've got a forest that has a zillion domains in it. I still have one schema master and one domain naming master. Only one of each of these. Now the other three is 5 minus 2 is 3. That's about the height of my math, unless we're doing binary. Ones and zeros I can do. The other three are domain specific. I spell specific, S-P-E-C-I-F-I-C. The other three. So, they are what? The PDC emulator. We'll talk about that. The PDC emulator. The infrastructure master. And the RID, relative ID master. These are in your book, by the way, in chapter 4. And like I said, when I get to the slides, we go into great depth. I'm trying to give you the review of the stuff you need to know that is important for the test. So, here's the thing. If you look at those multiple choice, one of the multiple choice talks about Fismo distribution, and what it says is something like, I read these multiple choice earlier today when you were having visions of sugar plums. One of them says you've got a forest and you've got X number of domains, and they ask you how many of each there are. Did I do something wrong?
I'm just trying to, that says infrastructure.
Yeah, it says it. It doesn't look like it.
No, it doesn't.
It's hieroglyphics. So, let me see your book, please. Yeah. Is this, so if you look at, number 4 on page 96, it gives you a little situation, and it says you got this and you got that. How many of these of each do you have? Well, it doesn't matter what the situation is. If we have a single forest, we know we only have one schema master and we only have one domain naming master. No matter how many domains we have, we only have one of each of these. So when you look at those multiple guess answers on number, what was it, 4? No matter, unless you have more than one forest, you'll only have one of each of these. And then, depending on how many domains you have, you're going to have one of each of these, PDC emulator, infrastructure master, and RID master, for each domain. So if I have 5 domains, I have 5 PDC emulators, and 5 infrastructure masters, and 5 RID masters. Does that make sense? These 2 roles, Fismo roles, are forest specific. These 3 are domain specific. So I got one forest with 20 domains, I got one of each of these, and I got 20 of each of these. Make sense?
Say that last part one more time.
So number 4 is
I-
A.
If I've got a forest and the forest contains 20 domains,
Okay.
right, inside of this forest, these 2 are forest specific, and I'm only talking about one forest, so I've got one of each of these roles.
Okay.
I got one schema master and one domain naming
So
master.
you've only got one of those, but you got 20 of each
I
of
got
those.
20 of each of these, because these are domain specific, so if I have 20
Each
domains,
domain is gonna have its own.
Okay.
each domain will have its own of these, but these are unique to the forest, so no matter how many domains I have within the forest, I only have one of each of these.
One, right. So that's, okay.
And that's the multiple choice. I don't know what the correct answer is, but that's how you get the answer.
That's it.
And it's on the test.
No, it's gonna
It's on the
be my
exam.
bad.
He's
Come back.
So 4 would be A, right?
I don't know what the correct answer. I think the example they give is a root
It's 4 domains.
with 3 child, which means I have one schema, one domain naming master, or one domain naming master, and then if I have 3, I've got to have 3 of each of these.
Wouldn't it be 4?
And there
Well,
will be
4
4.
including the forest.
Of course, the forest, so it
3
will be.
for each domain. So
Yeah.
the forest is a domain in itself. Because when you
Let's
create
see then.
When you create the first domain controller in a domain, like you did with your parent,
Let's see.
it's also the
1 and
forest.
4.
Because the forest starts with the first domain.
Okay,
So 4 would be C then?
yes,
Yeah.
see.
Oh, I have to look up the answer because I haven't read the answers. But
No,
I'll
I
read
mean,
and tell you.
in the book, the
It would be
situation
the
in the
4.
book.
Yeah, I have to look at it today because I haven't read the answers. I just read the questions.
Circle C.
It's C.
Let's see.
Okay.
Ju-
So,
Julie.
what does the schema master do? What's its role? And again, these are going to be on the slides with more information. I'm giving the information that's like the important stuff. What does the schema master do? It controls modifications, updates, changes, whatever you want to call it, to the schema. Because the schema is the definition of all objects in the active directory, right? That was the first thing I mentioned.
Right.
Somebody's got to be in charge. And the schema is forest-wide. So we've got to have someone in charge of that to make sure that the updates happen and it's all coordinated, you know, you don't have just everybody doing anything to the schema. So the domain controller that holds the schema master role, the schema master FSMA role, controls that. So, the only time, let's say I'm the domain controller and I'm the schema master. I have the FSMA role for schema master. And my power supply goes out and I don't have redundant power supplies, so I die. I'm down. And we have to order a new power supply from HP, and it takes them, who works for FedEx? FedEx takes it overnight, right? Absolutely, positively, overnight. Do they use that saying anymore? They still do it though, right? Very cool. But we're down. This machine is down. The schema master is down. The schema master basically controls changes, updates, modifications, whatever to the schema. So, a user tries to log on. Is it a problem?
No?
Nope. Because the schema master only deals with schema stuff. So the fact that it's down has no bearing on a user logging on. Check your multiple choice. That's the question.
Yeah, number 5.
Okay, I'm not going to do this every week. I'm trying to be nice.
Which one is this?
Anybody's not paying attention and gets anything wrong on the multiple choice. So, now, someone said, I think it was, what was your name again? It was, you didn't want to go by Bobby, so it's Robert. So I can say the person who's not Bobby.
Everybody just
Yeah.
So, the RID master, I'm skipping around here a little bit. The RID master, which is a domain-specific role, relative ID, which is the relative IDs are the things that allow us to have everything unique, users, groups, whatever. Part of the relative ID is made up of the domain information, and the other part is a unique alphanumeric sequence. And this way I can have 10 John Smiths user accounts, and they're all have unique identifiers. So, increments of, the RID master gives out these little groups of IDs, like giving out little tickets or whatever. It gives them out to other domain controllers. So if I'm connected to domain controller 6 and I'm creating a new user, I've got a bunch of unique IDs available for me to use. I don't, as the administrator, you don't see them, but that's what's happening in the background. So, the person who's not Bobby said earlier, the RID master gives out how many of these at a time?
500
500. That's on the multiple choice there somewhere.
increments.
Increments of 500. And you'll see that your RID, as I mentioned before, it has the domain information, the domain SID, or the domain identifier, plus the unique relative identifier. This long alphanumeric sequence uniquely identifies that user or that group or whatever it is, so that I can have 10 users with the same name and they all have unique identification. Okay, so if I want to add or remove a domain, who handles that? Who's in charge? FSMA. Add or remove a domain, the domain naming master. Alright, so if I'm adding or removing a domain, and the machine that holds the domain naming master role is unavailable, it's down, whatever, I can't get to it, that means I cannot add or remove a domain. Because the reason that the domain naming master is a forest-wide role and not a domain specific is someone's got to make sure we don't get two domains with the same name. Someone's got to be in charge of that. So this is forest-wide, this controls it. So if the machine that holds this role happens to be down, I can't add the local choice that is on the exam. Add or remove a domain, the domain naming master must be available. Otherwise you'll get an error, so you can't do it. Okay? Now, the PDC emulator, we mentioned earlier, for those of you that weren't here, that in NT4, domain controllers were not multi-master. You had the PDC, the primary domain controller, it was in charge, and you had all the other domain controllers were backups. So in order for any update to be done, you had to talk to the PDC. Well, we got rid of that in 2000 and above. However, for backwards compatibility, we have a machine that has a FSMA role of the PDC emulator. So if an NT4 client, something old, were to search for the PDC, the machine that holds this role will identify itself as a PDC, even though really it's not. He's an emulator. He emulates. Very cool, right? Now, he does some other things, or it could be a she. He, she, Who?
Oh, it can be a it.
So, he does some other things too. So,
He, she.
Yeah,
let's see.
It.
he should. That's what he was saying.
All right.
Is anybody checking to make sure I'm not making up stuff? Because occasionally I'll make something up just to see if
No,
anybody.
we sitting right here waiting
So
with you, bro.
far?
Now that'd be funny.
Everything's checking out.
Everybody be stuck.
Where's your going?
So,
Analyze movement.
anybody know what NTP is? NTP? Network Time Protocol.
Yeah, the TikTok thing.
Yeah, and these aren't the only two, but the Naval Observatory's the official clocks of the U.S. are tick and tock.
Yeah, Big Ben was taking.
All right. So, why do we care? Because Windows 2K,
And above.
2 anything, and Vista, and XP, and Windows 7 use Kerberos.
Turbo roll.
The three-headed dog. What is a three-headed dog? They called it something else, but that's kind of.
That's what Kyle said.
And Kerberos is an MIT thing. It's not a Microsoft thing. Kerberos is generic. Many Unix systems use Kerberos, right? Who knows Unix? Somebody back there has talked about Unix before. Linux, whatever. So, Kerberos is highly tied to time as a part of its security system. The time is important. It factors the time in. It has tickets, and we'll talk about that more later. But the key thing to know is that Kerberos, the security system, is very sensitive to time. Therefore, our domain is sensitive to time. So, you have one DC in the domain, that's the PDC emulator. You thought I was talking about PDC emulator. And then you got a bunch of other DCs, domain controllers. And then you got some clients. So in the case of the example, we'll use Vista. You'll find that Vista is mentioned on one of your questions dealing with time, PC. So, when the client logs on or connects to the domain, actually the way it happens is when the client boots up and the machine account, machines within a Windows domain have a machine account just like users have an account, it talks to a domain controller. So let's assume he or she talks to this DC. That means this domain controller that authenticated them is the one that will set their time. May not need to be changed, but it will ensure that their time, date and time, matches what the DC has. Just like if you do it on the internet, unless you've made a change and you're using a Windows machine, it's talking to Microsoft's time servers to ensure your time gets adjusted. The client / the user talks to the DC that authenticates them to get the time. This DC synchronizes with the PDC emulators. The DC synchronize with the PDC emulator for the time. And the PDC emulator should be synchronizing with an external time source, which could be tick or tock, network time protocol. Could be somewhere else. It could be Windows Time Server, which is a Microsoft thing, and there's others. But the user / machine, their time information comes from the DC that they authenticate to, which is one of the multiple choice questions.
The answer too. D.
Which question is that?
Number 8.
Number 8. And the reason this whole time thing is important is because
D.
of Kerberos security. They don't mention that. That's why it's important. And the PDC emulator, this FSMA role, that's one of its jobs,
Keeping up with the time.
is to be in charge of the time because the other DCs synchronize off of his or her time. And he or she should be synchronizing. They may be synchronizing, the PDCs of the domains could synchronize with the forest and the forest external, but at some point you should be synchronizing externally with an external time source. Don't have to, but otherwise if your clocks get off, there's nothing to fix them unless you just catch it yourself. Because everybody knows the time is the same and you put minus so many Greenwich mean, right? Okay.
Yeah.
What did you say it was?
Who?
You.
Say what was?
The front rate.
Number 8. It would be D, wouldn't it?
Oh, I thought you were saying B. I'm like,
Yeah.
hey,
So the client talks
No,
to
yeah,
the domain
they-
controller that authenticates them, the domain controller that they initiate their communication with is who they're going to sync time with. It may not always be the same DC every time they talk, but whatever DC they talk to, that's the one they'll get the time from. So that was number
8.
Okay, so I think I mentioned this before. I know I mentioned this before, but it's on one of the questions. The SID, the security identifier, which is the alphanumeric string that identifies the user of the group or whatever it is made up of the AD domain information plus a RID, a relative identifier. What question is that?
9. Let's see, relative identifier.
So if I'm in domain A, I get the domain's information, the domain SID, plus I get a relative identifier for me, which comes out of that pool of how many? 500, which the RID master controls and hands out to everybody.
Oh,
So, if I'm a domain controller, and man, my orange pen almost got away from me. If I'm a domain controller and I run out of these relative identifiers,
right.
I run out of them. And for some reason the RID master is down or not available.
Oh, you don't go to the next 500.
I'm kind of messed up because I can't create anything anymore until I get some more IDs. Alright? So, we know there's only one RID master in the domain. So if that machine goes down, it needs to come up within some reasonable period of time because there's no way, well there may be some way to tell, but reasonably speaking, there's no way to really know how many IDs each DC has left in its pool. Could be inconvenient. Now, I didn't draw a pumpkin again. Let's see. Okay, so we're gonna move FSMA roles around tonight. I'm gonna modify the lab tonight because of the lab, when the last class did this lab, one of the things the lab has you do is kill the global catalog to show you that typically you can't log on if the global catalog is not available. The problem is they have real big problems getting it to work again after that, so we're not gonna do that. And the first DC automatically becomes a global catalog server because we need a global catalog server, and it's the first DC, so he's automatically a global catalog server. If you remember, when you did the DC promo on the first one, the little box for GC was checked, and it was low lighted, so you could not uncheck it. Typically, I think it's checked by default, but you can uncheck it, assuming there's one already there. So, how do we get these FSMA roles to go somewhere else? Because now if we have 200 or 300 DCs, we don't necessarily want them all on the same machine. Actually, depending on the environment, we definitely don't. In a small environment, it's okay. So there's two ways. We can transfer them, which is an orderly process, which means if DC1 has the role and we want to put it to DC2, we do a transfer, and I'll show you how to do that, if my VMs will work. We do a transfer, and these two talk to each other, and there's an agreement, and we're transferring this role over here. It's orderly. DC1 knows he's giving it up, DC2 knows he's getting it. That has it. We're just basically Active Directory just moves the pointers over. Without the normal process is for it to talk to the DC that has the role and tell that DC, okay, you're giving it up, and he records that in his database. When we seize it, we only do this generally when the machine that has it is not recoverable, and we have Active Directory take it and put it somewhere else. If you rebuild this machine, you rebuild it clean. You don't try. If you decide later you found a backup and you want to try to restore it, you don't want to do that if you've already seized the role. You want to build it clean. So we only seize when it is not possible to transfer, and we only do it as when we're absolutely sure. We don't do it if the RID master is just down for a few minutes. We wait till it comes back up if we want to move that role. So, where do we find the roles?
Active Directory, users and computers,
Well, we find 3 of them there. Which 3?
the domain based and stuff.
The domain-based FSMA roles, I think I erased that. The domain-based, we right-click on the domain in Active Directory users and computers, and it says Operations Masters. You'll see this tonight when you go to lab. It says Operations Masters, and it will have a little pop-up thing, and it will have 3 tabs. One for PDC, or PDC emulator. One for PDC, because that's a domain-specific. One for Infrastructure Master, and one for RID Master. And assuming that your machines work properly, it will give you the option. It says, okay, machine A has it. And then down below it, it will show you what other machines, other domain controllers it knows about. And it will allow you to select another machine and click transfer or move, I don't know what it calls it. And it will transfer that role. Now, if there's some issue between your machines, it won't work. But that's how you do those three. The domain specific is in AD users and computers. There's like the last multiple choice, or next to the last, talks about this. I'm not sure which one they asked about. Which one are they asking about?
Let me tell you.
PDC emulator.
They ask about PDC emulator. So Active Directory users and computers. There are other ways to do it, but in the GUI, the graphical user interface, Active Directory users and computers is where you find the three domain-specific PDC emulator, infrastructure, and RID. That's where you find the little tab where you can transfer them through the GUI. Now, for the other two, the schema master and the domain naming master, where would be the logical place to find the domain naming master? Active Directory domains and trust. Right? Remember domains and trust? Ever seen that? We'll see that tonight, hopefully. Active Directory domains and trust is where that is. And where would we find the schema master?
I can directly schema.
Well, yeah, the schema master snap-in. Now, here's something that's interesting about the schema master snap-in. Everybody know what snap-in is? An MMC, Microsoft Management Console? The schema master snap-in, by default, won't work. It doesn't work by default, out of the box. And Microsoft won't admit this, but the reason is because they don't want people messing with this unless they know what they're doing. So you can't go into the schema master MMC and mess with the schema master without having some clue as to what you're doing, or at least being able to look it up, how to make it work. It can't be done accidentally. So, everybody knows about registering DLLs? Everybody know about regserve32? Everybody done it before? Register DLL, unregister DLL? A DLL is a dynamic link library, right? That's a bunch, who's a coder? That's a bunch of code in a little library, right? That's a library of all stuff. That's a highly technical way to put it, right?
Yeah.
And it has to be registered in order to be used, right? So you use regserve32, and if you just put regserve32 in the name of the DLL, the default action of it is to register. And you can put, what is it, /u to unregister, or -u, or something like that. /u. So, the DLL for the schema master that the snap-in needs to use is, and it'll be in the slides, it's like SCHMGT or something, schema management, something like that, .dll, is not registered by default. Which means, if you want to use this snap-in and you want it to work, you have to know enough to go register the DLL, which prevents people that don't know what they're doing, or at least accidentally, getting in this and creating problems. So the schema master, snap-in, or MMC, is where you manage the schema master if you wanted to move it from one machine to another. The domain naming master is in Active Directory domains and trust, and the other three are in Active Directory users and computers. And the question, what act about PDC emulator? Is that what somebody told me? So that one's an Active Directory users and computers, and you'll see that tonight. And hopefully you'll be able to transfer them. If your machines work right, you will. If they don't work right, then maybe not. How much time do I have before we gotta get out of here? 15 minutes? All right. Oh, I didn't talk about universal group caching. I don't know if that's on the multiple choice or not. All of this stuff I'm mentioning is going to be covered in more detail in the slides. What we're going to do is, after the break, we're going to go through the slides. And then we're going to do the labs. But even if I had you do everything that's in the lab for tonight, that's in the lab manual, if you have a group is specific to the domain. But if I have a big forest with a bunch of groups, right? So I have a forest and I have 10 domains. And I want to be able to add permissions or whatever. I want to make a user a member of a group and have that work throughout all the domains. A universal group can do that. Normally groups are within the domain. So if I add a person to a group in the ITT domain, it just applies to the ITT domain. I can't take that group and add it to some other domain. But a universal group can cross domain boundaries within the forest. So I have 20 domains in the forest, I can create a universal group, and people from any domain can be in that universal group. It's universal. Very cool, right? However, it's managed by, back to, the global catalog. The global catalog. So, if I have a site, and we know a site is defined by a subnet, and it's used, it's a way that Active Directory can be managed. Active Directory application can be managed by administrators. I threw 3 test questions and answers in there right in that one sentence. Sites are defined by subnets. It allows administrators to manage Active Directory application. That's 2 questions. Subnets, Active Directory application. What was the other one I threw in? Universal groups. Cross-domain, multiple domains within a forest. Now, if I'm going to log in and I'm a member of a universal group, global catalog manages universal groups. If the global catalog's not available, I've got a problem. However, if we've got all these sites, and one of our sites, our locations, defined by subnet, is in Podunk. Everybody knows where Podunk is, right?
Yeah, it's right past, Bonthok.
Yeah. It's way out there in the middle of nowhere, right?
Alright.
And we've got crappy communication, and it's up and it's down and it's unreliable. I may not want a global catalog server out there, which means a domain controller that has a little box for global catalog check. That's how we define a global catalog. We just check a box, and if everything works, it's very cool. I may not want that out there because there's extra traffic, because we know that the global catalog contains a partial attribute set of information for everyone in the forest and a full attribute set for everyone in the domain. And if I'm out here in Podunk with crappy communication and all that, I may not want to put a GC there because the replication traffic is going to be more than I want to deal with. So, what you can do, or what you do by default, is you go across the network to a global catalog. You query DNS, erase DNS, we query DNS for the underscore GC service record on port 3268. I query DNS, and it tells me to find a domain controller, and Podunk goes to Tokyo or wherever, get the global catalog universal group information. However, there is a hybrid solution. We don't want Podunk to have to do that all the time. So, we have what's called universal group, G-R-O-U-P, caching, C-A-C-H-E. I guess with ing, you drop the E and put ing, huh? Caching. Not cache like dollars, cache like storing stuff. Universal group caching. If I enable universal group caching on this domain controller in Podunk, I got universal group caching enabled. I have no GC over here. Universal groups are controlled by GCs. So, the guy sitting in Podunk goes to log in. He's a member of universal group and needs to talk to a GC. So he zips across the network by querying DNS service record underscore GC on port 3268. He comes over here and he talks to the global catalog. It gives his universal group information, whatever he's a member of, and he takes it back and sends it back to Podunk. If this machine has universal group caching enabled, he caches that information. So the next time this guy goes to log in and do this, this DC has cached information, and he doesn't have to do this whole thing back to the GC. He's got it cached. Now, the cache is only valid, it's in the book, I think it's 8 hours, it has to refresh every 8 hours or so. It's enough for at least the average business day. Don't quote me on the 8 hours, I may be wrong on that, I think that's what it is. If you look up universal group caching, it'll tell you in the book. So, but the whole purpose of it is we need universal groups, we've got to talk to a GC for that, and we don't want to put a GC everywhere, particularly in locations that are like Podunk. So we enable caching, and then every time Bob does something during the day, his stuff is cached, and we don't have to make that trip back to the GC. So it's kind of a hybrid between, we get the advantages of a global catalog without actually having it there, because primarily what we're looking at in the global catalog for most people, they don't know they're doing this, but their interaction with the global catalog many times has to do with universal groups. Universal groups allows us to add members from multiple domains. Very cool, right? Let's see what I missed. Oh, did I mention the homework to do tonight? Everybody, I got emails from a bunch of people. So if you sent me an email, I'm sure I've got it.